Okay, welcome, Marko.
Hello, how are you?
Very well. Great to see you in-house with Palestra.
That's
You,
right.
one of my favorite people to be a part of this. And for everyone who's new to Marko, Marko is the CEO of PlusPlus. Very passionate about personal growth, and he's the founder and CEO of PlusPlus. It's a company that believes work is where growth happens. Sounds familiar. And prior to PlusPlus, of course, Marko's claim to fame was helping build Twitter University, which is an internal program to uplevel Twitter engineers. And Twitter had acquired his former company, Maracana, where they train software developers in cutting edge open source technologies. And of course, Marko is an avid runner, skier, and startup investor at Sandhill Angels, as well as a CrossFitter and once martial artist,
That's right.
which brings us to how we're connected in some sense as well.
Yeah.
I think it was probably 15 years ago that you were doing Aikido. Is that right?
It's been a while, early 2000s, in San Francisco, and then I think we crossed paths at the dojo in Oakland, right?
I
I
think
don't
it's
think we
very
met, but
possible we did.
yeah, we're at the same dojo, possibly at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a great foundation to talk about our relationship as well, the concept of the dojo, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Hmm.
And then, of course, the in-house with Polyester theme, just for those of you who are new to listening, it's in-house because we want to feature CEOs, thought leaders, coaches, authors who really are focused on helping people grow at work. And of course, that starts from the inside out with the leader. So we're going to cover today, I'm sure, a variety of topics, but anything, and Marko, your journey from being a leader to being in forum to experiencing your own coaching, and of course, what you're doing for your own team in-house at PlusPlus. So tell us a little bit about your background and history for those who are just meeting you now.
Well, where do I start? Maybe I'll start with interesting sort of like a business um, history. So I remember it was I think 2005, 2007 timeframe. I was running a business by the seat of my pants. So I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just all I knew is that I wanted freedom. I wanted to work for myself. I want my own business. Uh, but it also felt super lonely and I had no experience, no background, no support, nothing. I just kind of winged it. And as I was doing that, I came across entrepreneurs organization, EO. And through that, I learned about forum, which is basically a small group, usually seven plus minus two other CEOs like myself, where we sort of get together and compare notes. And so that was my first sort of meeting my tribe um,
Who
case.
started that forum with you way back then? Who was in there?
Well,
People you're
Darius,
still in with it now? Yeah.
yeah, so it's pretty much the same people. So Darius, Anton, um, I think they were the early ones, John, Doug, and then later on, I think Jeff joined. So it's been fairly stable for the last 10, 12 years, but we started about 15 years ago.
That's amazing. I know
Yeah,
how hard it can be to just get to stability with a forum, and you guys have been together for 15 years.
yeah, yeah. And we meet basically every month for about half a day on average. So lots of retreats, lots of once in a lifetime experiences along the way. And so through that, I sort of got the value of, first of all, having the community and having that safe place to compare the notes. And also live the sort of like now we call it integral life. Back then, I kind of thought of it as a 360. So
Mm-hmm.
not just having work, but also integrating family, community, self into it. Um, so I grew. I felt I grew a lot by comparing the notes with my peers, essentially. Um, and so that's kind of how life went for the 10 plus years. Um, and then when I was at Twitter, I was sort of thinking how elite athletes, elite CEOs of Silicon Valley companies, etc., they all have people in their corner, right? So even though you may be a tennis player or basketball player or whatever, there's usually a team around you, a team
Mm-hmm.
that's rooting for you, right? So it's like your coach, your nutritionist, your mentor, your advisor. Um, there's just people that are there behind the scenes. And so we don't see that, right? There's a public figure, but then there are people in their corner as well that are usually not as visible. So I was thinking, why is this available only to like the sort of the CEOs of big companies? Like why not to an engineer or other professional or a small company CEO? And so I was at MIT. We do this gathering of titans. It's an EO event, and so once a year. So I was there with 65 other CEOs and started asking around, and I realized that many of them had their people in their corner. Many of them had coaches or mentors or advisors, etc. In addition to their peer group.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how sort of like the light bulb went off, and and I started thinking about, well, I want that too. I want people in my corner. I wanna be able to develop deliberately, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as I was talking to people, then your name came popping up. I talked to Brian, I talked to Tony, Lilius, and so on and
I
so on.
got a very excited call at like 10 p.m. one night from Tony Lilios, and I'm not going to say whether or not he had had a few glasses of wine, but he and Brian Hansel had met you, and Tony just got on and was like, "You have got to meet this guy, Marko. Like he's up to such cool stuff. You guys just need to talk." And he used to work at Twitter, and now he's doing this other thing, PlusPlus, and we must have talked 30 minutes about you. So that was my first introduction to you.
Yeah.
And and so what from there happened? How were you uh, proceeding from there?
Well, so I actually kept talking to. I also talked to other people. I suddenly realized the importance of. So the first insight was just realizing the importance of having a coach, right? And then it was sort of like, well, who's the right coach for me, right? And so I started talking to a few different people, um, and then what resonated with, and so my experience back then was that it's a little bit of a cottage industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of like, um, you know, there's not there's no real like certification, or even if it is, it's kind of like who certifies the certifiers. So it became sort of like, who's the right person, like how do you gauge that? And um, and it's challenging because there's not enough signal. It's really recommendations from friends, or sort of interviewing people. And so it was kind of considering who is the right person for me. I sort of, what resonated with me about you was your focus on integral. So there was some groundedness in a methodology, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like you just picked something out of thin air and decided and put a shingle on the door and said, "Hey, I'm going to be a coach," right? Like you actually had, here's a body of work that's rooted in some research and some science and so on, and you were an expert in that, and that's what you were bringing to a table. So that was one aspect. The other aspect was also your background with martial arts and sort of spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I was looking for something that was beyond what I can Google or read in a book, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the books are valuable and interesting, um, but that's not like the magic of coaching. So that was kind of the two different aspects that resonated with me specifically.
For the people who haven't heard of integral, what would you say to explain what that is? And this is always a bit of a tricky question, but what's your understanding of it?
Looking at a person's life holistically, and that was actually a really big revelation for me when I joined DEO.
Mm-hmm.
I joined DEO because I wanted to make my business better. And I thought I needed people who are going to give me technical insights into how do I optimize this, how do I optimize that. And then I joined the forum, and then this is 2007-ish. And then my peers were talking about core values and core purpose and things like that. I was like, what is this? Some new age, California BS thing? I was like, kind of turned off. Like, I'm like, guys, I need to increase sales. I need to improve my marketing. Like, what's this core value thing? Or like, just so that initially didn't resonate with me. And then I sort of realized how finding that sort of core of you, like the why, like why you do what you do, and like the groundedness was so important. So I was like, there's something deeper here. It's not just about this technical mumbo jumbo about running a business, but it's like looking inside of us. And then 2009 hit, the recession, so a lot of us had sort of like come to Jesus moments and like questioning. Like a lot of entrepreneurs link our identity to our business. So if my
Mm-hmm.
business is doing bad, I'm doing bad. So that's like a really common anti-pattern for us, source of suffering, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so by sort of looking integrally at the person, I was like, well, no, there's that, and then there's this, right? So it was just kind of like, it gave me some power. Um, I didn't know about integral yet. Like I said, I knew about looking at the life in a 360 way. So how different parts of the life matter just as much.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was what I learned in EO. And then when I met you, you started talking about the integral, the four quadrants, sort of self and other, and then internal, external. And so that in that I saw sort of the next level of what I already knew as a 360 way of looking at life, if you
Mm-hmm.
will.
And of
So
course, the part of that too is so that we can get to the next level. And I wonder if that would help you explain what Plus Plus is for a moment for people who don't know the history of how you chose that business name.
yeah, so that's a good one. So my previous company that I started with my brother, Maracana, our purpose, the reason why we existed was to help people get to the next level, right? Like, so that was our purpose. And that really resonated with me. And so how that manifested itself is we were going around and teaching tens of thousands of engineers at large tech companies cutting edge technologies. So like we would go to Intel and teach 10,000 engineers on say Android worldwide, right? So and we would do that for many companies. So that was our business. So it was really sort of like, hey, here's a new technology. We'll send a instructor put them on the flight and send them to your office and teach you that thing that you didn't know. You didn't know, now you know. So that was kind of it was very much skills based. It was transactional, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
right? So anyway, that company ended up getting acquired by Twitter, and then and as I was kind of thinking about, so I got out and I was thinking about what's the next thing that I want to do, and so for my first business I didn't build it. All I knew is I wanted to work for myself, right? Like I didn't really know what my purpose is, what I want in life. Like it wasn't grounded in any sort of values. It was just sort of like, other than freedom, I guess that would be one
Mm-hmm.
value,
Right.
independence. So, but then the second act, the next company, I sort of had a little bit of a luxury of a runway. I sort of had the opportunity to sort of think about what is that matters. Like, what do I care about? Like, what do I want to do or be over the next a decade or two? Because that's how long it takes. And so I did a lot of sort of meditating on that months. And I sort of realized came back full circle. And I realized that I really still care about helping people get to the next level. And I happen to do that with technical folks or engineering companies. So I was looking for a name that suggested next level, getting to the next level, improving, transforming, something along those lines, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I kept looking for all the alternatives and combinations and something that's available trademark wise. And so I remember a sleepless night, and I was visiting my aunt in Belgium, um, and couldn't sleep, and I was kind of running all these permutations in my head of various names, even in Latin. And so then I came up with PlusPlus. And it's basically in programming, PlusPlus is an operator that means to increment by one. So like C and C++ languages, C++ is one better than C, right? So it's got this like sort of a little bit of a sort of programming themed, technical themed sort of backstory, yet it means to increment, to improve, to get to the next level. So I thought it was perfect, and it's also, you know, works in many languages and etc. Easy to pronounce.
And very integral, incidentally, as well.
Yeah.
So how would you tell people what PlusPlus is, or what do you do at PlusPlus?
Yeah. So again, you know, if you kind of think about my purpose is helping people get to the next level, yet I also want to do that at scale. So meaning I don't want to get like at Maracana, we were, you know, we were providing skills to about 10, 20, 30,000 people a year. So, you know, it had some impact, but not millions. And it wasn't transformational, it was transactional, right? Like you didn't know Android, we teach you Android, now you know it. So it was incrementing your skills. It wasn't improving, it wasn't transformational. So I wanted to do something that is helping people to get to the next level, ideally transformationally, and doing that at a very large scale. So making a bigger impact. So PlusPlus is basically, we say we unlock expertise at large tech companies. So we focus on technology companies because they tend to be most open to pondering what the future of work looks like. And within those companies, we're helping very smart people share their knowledge, and through that, creating better organization. So unlocking expertise at scale. So that's what we do for large tech companies.
Yeah, I remember you first describing it as well. It's like the notion of crowdsourcing with peer learning. Yeah. And it's meant to, how would you say, what is it meant to replace that's kind of conventional or a bit archaic at this point inside of organizations?
Yeah, so for example, if you look at that typical company, like Twitter, for example, there was no mentorship formally, right? Like you could sort of tap a person on the shoulder and ask for a relationship, but that was kind of awkward, and it depended on you being outgoing and so on. So like it was very ad hoc, right? Except for the executives. Executives could afford that, you know, expensive executive coach. But that was just the very top of the pyramid, right? It wasn't for the regular folks. So one of our customers, Airbnb, for example, they thought, how do we democratize this? How do we enable everyone to be a coach or anyone to be, you know, or mentor and a mentee? How do we enable that? And how do we do that at scale? And so that was very interesting to kind of build that program with them. So that any of the Airbnb's employees, A, can stand up and say, I would like to mentor somebody, and B, say, hey, I would like to find a mentor. And so we did that. We helped Airbnb do that, and then Shopify and companies like that as well. So that was sort of, it felt cool, right? Like you're suddenly democratizing something that like I have experienced with you is amazing. Yet I realize that I'm like in that like lucky 1% or whatever that number is that has access to that and has insights to all that. And I kind of happen to stumble upon it. So how do we do that at scale? How do we enable many, many tens of thousands, you know, employees at companies to have access to that? So that's sort of like what inspired me. Yeah.
And this is where I start getting excited again as I reflect about us first meeting, and I'm sure why Tony was getting excited, because if you even start from the top with EO, it's like all the CEOs go boondoggle. They get together and they go away from their businesses and they have these transformative experiences, and then they come back to their businesses and they're like, their team is like, what happened to this guy? He's different. But it's still like trickle down leadership development theory. And I always wondered the same thing. It's like, well, why couldn't you bring that dynamic back to your team so you have more of an interdependent team? And why does it have to be trickle down? Why can't we democratize? access to this type of form experience or executive coaching experience. Have everyone be a coach. So back to the notion of the dojo. Why couldn't that be for everyone in the company? So we'll often talk about disrupting leadership training literally by each word. Like it's not just for leadership anymore. It could be for everyone in the company. And it's not a training. It doesn't start and stop, because when's the last time you learned to, get your black belt in a weekend workshop, or paint like Picasso, or drive your car on the track? So I think that's where we were really connected initially. It's like, yes, you have to have your own deep experience and do your work as a leader to be a conscious leader, certainly. But then what can you bring back in-house for people? So, and maybe that's a good frame to talk about, your journey, because one thing I really admire about you, Marko, is you've been very successful, and you and your brother, I should say, together too. And you've built one of the most just conscious, empathetic, and high performing teams around you as a result of the work I think you've done on yourself. So if you're willing, I'm curious what you would share about, like, as we started coaching, let's talk about integral. Like, there are these different toolkits, and some of them are more business centered. Some of them are more to deal with conflict and communication, but some of them go straight into yourself. So I'm curious if, as you reflect on your own coaching journey, what's been the highlight reel? Like, what have you discovered? What tools did we use? So if we talk shop a little bit about that, if you're open to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, so first of all, of course, I wanted coaching for myself, right? Like I was sort of like wondering what are my blind spots, like what's, because I realized that, what got me here is not going to get me to there. Like there's the next level for me, and I have blind spots that are sort of creating a glass ceiling that I'm not aware of, preventing.
I like to say they don't call it the unconscious for nothing. You
Yeah,
can't see your blind spots by definition. So
exactly. Like fish doesn't know it's what the water feels like, right?
mm-hmm.
So that's why I did the work with you, and so that sort of that quadrant of integral was the most helpful for me. Sort of editing my own beliefs, becoming aware of my own beliefs, getting access to them, and then editing them and figuring out what works for me and what doesn't, and right in changing that. So that was the most powerful part for me
And
initially.
when you say the work, which dimension of the work?
So
I mean, the tool, the work itself, the inquiry process?
yeah, the work itself, yes. So
Uh-huh, yeah.
I'm talking about the internal belief systems that
Right.
right.
The
So
work of Byron Katie for those listening. Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, exactly. Specific toolkits were the work, and then also and then also the communication, right? So external self, right? So how I communicate to others. So those were although I already knew a little bit about that, so it was sort of like that was practice, but the work itself, so internal belief system and access to that was sort of like that was like did not know sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
That's another kind of red pill, as we say.
yeah, yeah,
So for
exactly.
people new to the work, like what is inquiry? What is doing the work? What does that mean?
It's basically a lightweight system of reframing how we view things. So something happens, right? And then that's a fact. But then we the universe works on facts and humans work on stories, right?
Right.
So something happens, and then we tell ourselves a story about what happened, and that story can be powerful and work for us, or that story can be sabotaging us, right? So having access to realize that, oh, this happened and this is what I'm telling myself, but how about I tell myself something else, like take a look at the same facts from a different point of view and reframe the situation. That was a total Jedi move for me. Kind of having ability to having awareness, first of all, to be like time out, there's another way to look at this, and then a way to reframe that. So that's kind of that's what the work provides. It's sort of like a lightweight framework to do that. It's
Mm-hmm.
very simple. um, it's one of those, like, it's simple to understand. It's hard to become a second nature. So,
Yeah, like playing chess. It's simple to learn the rules. Yeah.
yeah.
And it's so powerful at dismantling the emotional triggers that throw us into kind of drama triangle mindsets. So, how and when did we integrate that work? Because I think the drama triangle fits right in with that as well, around working with mindset shifts.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, we did a lot of all that right away, you and I. So we sort of like went straight into the work, and then the drama triangle, and then the non nonviolent communication, MVC, and all those toolkits. So like that sort of upper half of the integral quadrants was the most helpful to me. So. Um, yeah.
And then how would you explain to people like, okay, well, that's leadership skills, that's communication skills. How and when did that start tying into your business and the impact on the business side of things? And that's the hardest part, right? It's the connective tissue between the two. Like, how does one impact the other?
Yeah. I mean, and that's presumably how you justify, if you like have to do the ROI calculation, like why do we do this?
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of like how I justify it, financially and all that. I mean, so like, look, I remember like there's so many cases. Like, I remember specifically, we had one customer that was really challenging us. Calling us out on our product wasn't mature enough. We had issues here, issues there, bugs, outages, you name it. Like it felt like fighting fires. And some customers are nice and they're sort of like, yeah, we kind of cut them a slack, they're a startup. But others called us out, and that calling out, that that's like that's like the fact. Like something happens, somebody calls you out. Now one way to view that is like there's an attack on me, and poor me, I'm a victim here, and like I'm gonna fight back, and so on. And so that just becomes like this, becomes an arms race, and it doesn't lead to any good outcome, right? Sort of it's yeah, so that's what the reframing, I
Would it be
guess.
helpful even to talk through like how would you pull a judgment or belief out of that situation and work with it to get to a place where you feel it's cleared? Like how did you work through it in that situation?
Well, I mean, step one was like, so first of all, noticing that I was emotionally triggered, that there was something there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then going through doing the work, which is essentially kind of journaling, meditative journaling on what's going on, and judging like the person, or this, it's usually the person, right? Something triggered you, triggered me. And so I would write all this like, they're bad, they're doing this, they're doing that. So kind of writing it out, and journaling on that, and then taking a step back and trying to see, is there an alternative way to look at that? Is there like what might be also true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even truer. And so I think that's the magic right there, like being aware of like, hey, there's another way to look at it, and then exploring that. Like that's the inquiry, right?
And it feels like that's where you're actually building your muscle to see your blind spots.
Yeah,
And there's that old Jungian notion of the shadow, which is just a word for the unconscious.
yeah,
And that the simplest way I can explain it is when you're pointing the finger, judging outwardly, there's these three fingers that are pointing back. And of course, what does that have to do with leadership? If I'm not walking my talk, if I'm judging you for what I'm guilty of, that can be fairly painful to look in the mirror at that stuff. So how would you describe the process of doing the work?
um, like the actual nitty-gritty details of
Or like,
like,
is it how painful is it to work through something like that, and what happens on the other side once you do?
well, so if I didn't know about the work, there would be a lot of conversations here. and I would be basically spinning the wheel. I would be I would have a lot of chatter that would just kind of like spin unresolved and cause stress, right? uh, with the work, I would basically be able to realize that, hey, I have this belief around this, and then I would explore alternative beliefs around that, like what else might be true, right? Is that what you're sort of like alluding to, or?
Yeah, sure. And then, so for example, like if you had the thought at the top, he's attacking me, it could
Mhm.
really be what are the perspective taking turnarounds you're talking about? It would be something like, well, he's not attacking me,
Oh, I see.
or
So
like, yeah,
yeah, so in this particular case, so I have a customer that's attacking me, and it's causing all this drama. But then I'm like, well, wait a minute, like I'm getting emotionally charged here. What's another? So that's kind of like the trigger to like do the work. What's another way to look at it? Oh, the customer is actually challenging me, right?
hmm
They want me to become better. They want they're pushing us to improve. They're pushing us to get our stuff together, to grow up, to mature. All these positive things, and this is where like becomes a drama triangle, right? So as opposed to being, oh, poor me, I'm a victim, it becomes, oh, I'm a creator, and this customer is a challenger to us, and so that, it's like a magical, like in one split second you sort of have what I had, like 180 change in perspective,
hmm
right? Powerless me as a victim to like powerful me as a creator being challenged by a customer to do better. So like being able to flip that around was magical, and allowed us to then triple customer business with that particular one,
hmm
and um, otherwise my old self would be like, screw you, and be like I said, it'd be like an arms race that nobody would be happy with, and there would be poor outcome. And we
And
ended up
that's the funny part of that, isn't it? Is we talk about the shadow projection or the notion of projecting our own unconscious. It's like if I don't catch that there's a different way of seeing this, I end up attacking the person who I think is attacking me. And then
yeah,
what happens to that relationship? Would you have, tripled the membership of that client if that had been the reaction to them?
yeah,
You know,
yeah. It would not, for sure. So yeah.
yeah.
So that was powerful, being able to catch that, um, and so yeah, so that becomes a powerful tool, like, and creates a level of awareness as well. That, yeah. So I find myself doing sort of that reframing through the work, often. Not necessarily always formally by writing, but sometimes it's just sort of
Yeah, it's a
journaling.
meditation, self-inquiry. Yeah. You can
Yeah,
shift it in your mind, yeah. With practice, certainly.
yeah,
Yeah, and it's one of the most advanced tools we have in our toolkit. So you've taken to it really well and implemented it and gotten the results as you're describing it. So I think that's great. That's our
yeah,
choice way of working with people if we can. Certainly mine anyway.
yeah.
Um, and and I'm still very curious about this notion of the shadow or the blind spots or the unconscious. What else did we do that really helped you see yourself in ways you couldn't see yourself before?
Uh, that's a that's good. I mean, I remember like we did a lot of sort of inquiry into rhino versus unicorn.
Yeah, that
Uh,
was great. Right.
yeah.
What would you
So
say about that? That kind of polarity work we did.
yeah, I was I struggled with like what kind of a business do I want to build, and the super simply, a unicorn, as most people know, it's $1 billion business. A rhino is a much more frequently, much easier to get to, but it's $100 million business, and they're great. They just have their own pros and cons, right? Like, so building a unicorn is higher risk, requires outside investors, requires languishing control, etc. Yet there's this bigger play. Um, whereas unicorn or a rhino would be more control, less stress, but smaller play. So
Like a
each one
small
has a
giant, they call that sometimes.
small giant. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I named them after mythical or less mythical animals. So yeah, so that's kind of how. I was struggling with that. I was like, what do I want to build? This or that, like chocolate or vanilla, and it's not like one is better than the others. Each one has its own pros and cons. Um, and so there was a lot of sort of like I was sort of like leaning toward building a rhino, uh, but I wasn't quite sure where that's coming from, right? Like it's one of those things like you can't just put it on a paper and do it analytically, uh, because it was based on feelings, it was based on emotions. Ultimately, it was based on fears, and
Hmm.
me, and it was kind of like tapping into that, like where's this coming from? Like why am I afraid? Like what do I fear? Giving up control or playing bigger or swinging for the fences or there was a lot of sort of like emotional things to process there.
Yeah, when we brought for those listening who are familiar as coaches or leaders, the immunity to change process was
Yeah,
perfect for that, and worked with that polarity as well, which
yeah,
is so fascinating because we often play offense and defense in our own minds at the same time. So we can say that we want something, whether it's
yeah,
the rhino or the unicorn, and then watch as we don't do it week after week. Like we run in a direction, there's a rubber band that's like pulling us right back to where we started. So yeah, that process. What else would you share about how that process works?
so,
Just
so,
to
so,
educate people.
yeah, so what pulls us back is that shadow, right? Like it's that fear and it's the unconscious, it's the unknown, like um and it had to do with a lot of stories I was telling myself. I was telling myself how I don't want investors. I don't want to give up control. I don't like that's what was holding me back to actually play a bigger game. And so being able to recognize where it's coming from is step one. And then that was a lot of the work that we did on that, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, and and then sort of doing the safe experiments, right? Like, so what would be a safe way to test some of these assumptions that I have, and sort of to see that they're not that there's another truth as well, right?
Hmm.
And so we did some safe tests, and that's ultimately we went out and raised money, and I actually had a fantastic experience doing that. And now looking back, it's like, oh, well, that was the best thing I did. Like, so
You said that to me the other day, right? I brought up the rhino and unicorn, and you're like, "Oh, that's like so last year." Where you're like
exactly.
in a new way with it, as if it were never even a holdup, which is really amazing.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a big sort of um, discovery, and then sort of t- testing it out, and it's like, oh, this is not bad. As a matter of fact, I enjoy it even more. So, but I didn't have access to that before.
Hmm.
So it was that safe test that kind of unlocked that.
Yeah, it's a very cognitive behavioral approach. It's like you start with a commitment and make a list of what they call a fearless inventory, or
Hmm.
you take personal responsibility for where you're not walking your talk. Even if you say you want to have a unicorn, but you do tons of things that get in where you're getting in your own way, sabotaging yourself. And the real brilliance of that process is it could stop there and say, oh, well, coach, hold my feet to the fire. I didn't do it. All right, well, what are you going to do this week? Close that gap. But it takes a totally different turn. And it says, well, what if you were doing these behaviors on purpose? What if a different part of you, like you said, an unconscious part of you was doing these things on purpose? It just happened to fly in the face of what the conscious part of you wanted. And then you look at competing commitments. Oh, I might also be committed to protecting myself in a certain way or preventing something terrible from happening because I have a big assumption. I have some story or assumption about something bad that will happen. And to your point, that's exactly the kind of thing. Once you kind of take the x ray of that, then you can say, in the words of Byron Katie, is it true? And can you absolutely know it's true? And then maybe there's other perspectives, if we turn it around, might be truer. And that leads to the safe test. Maybe I'll go out and see if it's actually true and get some evidence that would change this around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was a big one for me. That was very yeah. I mean, that, and back to integral, that was the probably the biggest value for me personally. So again, different people may find different toolkits resonate depending on what they are. But I had these blind spots, so that was my sort of what I needed.
I think it's worth repeating again because you went straight for, like, we joke, like the orange juice concentrate. Like, people need it watered down really to the point where it isn't even juice. It's almost just water with a little orange flavoring. But you really went for the shadow work, for the inner work, the inquiry.
Yeah.
How would you repeat back for those listening, like, that unlocked something in you? It wasn't just kind of navel gazing or something like that, but again, the connective tissue of, like, that was the thing, that was the stuff that really unlocked things for you.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, you know, it's not like a one-time thing. It was just I became aware of something, and now it's like a practice. Right? It's something that I need to kind of keep doing over and over again, and applying. So,
What are your practices these days? How do you practice with that?
Um,
and maybe that's a good segue as well for what you're doing in-house at PlusPlus.
Yeah. So, so, well, okay. So I mean, I kind of keep my own practice, which is really these days mostly around self-awareness through meditation, through journaling, gratitude, that sort of stuff. But then at the same time, what I realized was that, okay, so I had this great experience. What about how can I enable my people to have the same experience, right? And it was actually inspired by one of our customers, Shopify. So Toby, who founder of Shopify, he had an executive coach, and he sort of said, "Oh, this is awesome. I'll provide this to my leadership team." And so he brought his executive coach in house, and so now they had coach for the entire leadership team.
And they bought a few boutique coaching firms, didn't they?
Well, then they went out, they said, how do we scale this from just the executive suite to everyone else? So then they acquired a dozen plus practices, essentially. Like, so now they have a entire team of professional executive coaches based on integral methodology in-house that are available to all Shopify employees.
That is awesome.
Yeah. So these are, unlike Airbnb, which is like a more like everyone can stand up and be a lightweight trained to become a mentor. They have, Shopify have small
professional coaches.
Yeah. So it's a slightly different approach altogether. So
one interject there is just, speaking of blind spots, we've gone so much in the direction of having the peer coaching groups that when you told me about what Shopify had done, it's like I had completely skipped a step. Where, like, how amazing would it be just to have a staff of in-house coaches who anyone could go sign up for a coaching session anytime they wanted. And we were already kind of down into, let's have everyone peer coaching together. And so it was like the meat in the sandwich almost to hear you share that with me, and that we'd skipped a step basically in that sense.
Yeah. So that inspired me to sort of think about, like, well, how do I bring what I've learned with you to in-house? And so then I wrote a little proposal for something we call Team PlusPlus. In other words, how do we improve our own team? And so I pitched it to my team. At the time, it was just Don, who you know, and Don said, "Well, this is great. I believe in personal development and all that, but how does it connect to business? Like, so what would be the measure of success? It would need to not just make us feel good and love each other and all that. We also want the results, right? So how does it connect?
And Don's as a true sales guy, and a former martial artist as well. So exactly. What works? What's going to be functional?
Exactly. So then I updated my proposal, our internal proposal, and I basically said, well, if you learn certain toolkits, like for example, active listening, perspective taking, then we're going to be better with our customer discovery calls. We're going to be better connecting with the customers, having that level of understanding, being able to frame. So anyway, so I kind of connected what I wanted to do to also business outcomes that he cared about.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we basically launched Team PlusPlus, which is you lead every other week, which is available to the entire growth team in this particular case. So half the company goes to that. And then essentially they have access to the same things I had access with you in a group setting. So in the same material. And it's kind of interesting how we now as a company have a certain language that
Right.
that is used everywhere. Like I was just laughing, I was reading Slack this morning, and it was just like somebody's like, the story I'm telling myself is so
Yeah.
so it's like the language is normalized, which leads to that bond and culture. So
One of my other clients used to say the toolkit is the third person in the room.
yeah.
So as soon as people are sharing language or practices, it's almost like having, like how Darius talks about having a manager over everyone's shoulder by having objectified core values. It's the same effect of like we share language and tools. So it's disarming when we're using it. It's almost like having a referee in the room or a coach in the room with you. It can be very powerful.
Yeah.
And of course, we started by going off site. And what's
That's
counterintuitive is that when we are parading around with peer coaching as the new way to scale leadership, like turn everyone into a coach so that everyone can have access to coaching. But we actually start with the communication and high performance teamwork and conflict resolution stuff. What would you say about starting from that point and then kind of going to the coaching later on? What was that? The kind of conflict resolution, perspective taking, teamwork. How did that play out in your experience?
What's been super valuable is providing feedback, so having a place to give each other feedback, being able to actively listen to one another, to kind of have that back and forth, and so that was very valuable. When it comes to like sort of the nitty gritty of like how we do teamwork, meaning how do we get on the same page, things like that. We sort of we used different teams use different frameworks, so we're still sort of getting alignment on that. So we've been sort of like still working on that, experimenting. But feedback, providing feedback, active listening, perspective taking, that's been super valuable. Coaching as well, like T-Grow coach.
The grow model, yeah, right. T-Grow,
That's been valuable. Yeah. And so that's internally. Externally, again, active listening, perspective taking has been very valuable with customers for discovery calls, to really truly hear customers, be able to kind of empathize with them, understand their problem, and through that develop trust very quickly, because they feel heard, they feel understood. It wasn't like if somebody doesn't know us and we go on a call and we're trying to pitch, that's not going to go well. But if we go on a call and we listen and deeply listen and reflect and understand, and that instantly creates a level of trust, creates a level of we're sitting on the same side of the table working on the same problem together, as opposed to creating this adversary relationship of like they're sitting on the other side of the table,
right?
Sell them something. So that's been powerful.
Maybe this is the perfect time to bring up the Aikido metaphor again. How I know that you took to that material in particular, and I would say you're actually very good at it, especially the mirroring part, because you'd had the Aikido background, is my story.
Yeah.
How do you describe to people what that metaphor is? the physical metaphor.
Well, so the whole premise of Aikido is blending with the energy, and then once you blend with it, being able to redirect it in such a way that it works for you. So that requires a couple of things. It requires, first of all, a level of awareness to be able to blend with the energy, right? So if an attack is coming, like being able to, first of all, get out of the line and then understand it, right? Um, and
The
then
getting off the
second,
line is like not taking it personally, almost like sidestepping.
yes, exactly. It's like, well, I said, you said, I said, you said. Like I said, like if we're just kind of doing that, then that leads to an arms race. Like there's no winner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if it's like, well, I said, oh, let me hear more about that. What did you mean by that? What did you mean by that? So it suddenly becomes, we're sitting on the same side of a table. Like there's the experience of we're looking in the same direction. We're not opposing. We're like going in the same direction.
Which
And
is physically how the martial arts technique goes. You literally physically look the same direction when you blend with someone.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
so step one, being able to connect with that incoming energy. So get out of the line and connect to the energy. Step two is being grounded in your own values, and then being able to redirect that energy based on your values and what your beliefs, like things that you deeply, and knowing where that's coming from. It's like, oh, you said that. Okay, let me hear more. Okay, but so how about that? Like that would be sort of like the turning that energy around in a different direction based on something that is deeply, where you deeply rooted. And as like an art martial artist, you would literally feel your feet, as my sensei used to say, like you feel the ground, and it's not your just your body, it's your feet are going deep and penetrating the earth, and you're rooted to the
Mm-hmm.
ground, and you're unmovable from that point of view, and physically you actually feel heavy, very
Mm-hmm.
heavy. um, and then if you kind of take that into a business context, it's when we make a choice grounded in values,
Mm-hmm.
we are very heavy. We There's something that goes beyond the sort of just the level of ego, which would be sort of like too much energy here as opposed to more energy down in the deep roots of the ground. That would, to me, that's values, like being, and that a requires understanding values and being able to center and be rooted in those values.
So cool. I mean, you think about the fighters who are new or martial artists who are new, they use all upper body strength. They don't know how to ground down into their hips and connect to their center, which
Yeah.
means they also don't know how to connect to anyone else. And we used to joke that once you connect with someone else, you can throw them however you want. And not that you'd use that to manipulate, but the act of blending is to connect to what they care about at their core, the physical core of their body. Core is also heart. It's like core value.
Yeah.
It's what does that person care about? And can I mirror what they're saying back to them so well that they feel I've actually connected to them? And
Yeah.
then of course everyone aligns around values. People complain because they care about something. If we can hear it as something that they value, then we can stay aligned and look for a win-win kind of outcome, which is the essence of what conscious leadership is teaching too.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course. So what a great metaphor.
Yeah, I mean, so I remember like you and I wrestled in Esalen, like
Yeah, that's
physically.
right. And we did do some
Yeah.
wrestling there. We didn't even tell that story that you wanted to introduce me to your EO forum.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
suggested September 13th last year. I'm like, that's the one weekend I just can't do it. I'm co-leading a thing with Adam Leonard and Dustin DePerna at Esalen. And you're like, well, what thing? Like, we just signed up for a men's work thing at Esalen. I'm like, that's the thing. So we were suddenly there
Yeah.
having two things occur. One of which was like, what is happening here that it's forum and men's work, and let's have a forum 2.0 conversation with a very closely knit forum that's been together for years. And then we had the martial arts in the mix as well. So yes, what are you remembering about that?
Well, I remember we were in a yurt somewhere on the cliff of Big Sur area.
The edge of the
And
universe. Yeah.
exactly, the most beautiful place on earth. And I remember you and I were wrestling in front of like 30 men or something like that.
Hmm.
And initially, like I got wrapped up, right? Like I got wrapped up in. It's like I don't know why, but I was like emotionally triggered, right? And physically that manifested as a lot of like here. I was like here. I gotta wrestle you, right? I wasn't here.
Which meant you were lighter on your feet and easier to move around, manipulate.
Exactly. I was
Yeah.
totally off. In other words, I was totally off balance. Totally
Yeah.
100% off balance. Like you like energy was here, so which means you could just like you could throw me away and whichever way you wanted. And then you said something like, "What's going on? Like, relax." And I was like, ah, deep breath. Like that's
And
all.
you know what I remember? My assessment was it looked like you weren't having very much fun.
Well, yeah, because I was wrapped up in like looking good or something. I don't know what. Um, but then it was like you're like, just yeah, have some fun, relax. And I took like one deep breath, and just like energy just went from here down to the core, to the key. You know, like
Hmm.
I got in touch with that. I
The
got in touch
hara,
with
as they say, the
yeah,
hara in Japanese.
exactly how the chi or whatever. Like I got connected to Earth. Um, and then it was a totally different experience. It was much more lightweight. It was much more playful. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it looked different from the outside. It certainly felt different internally for me. So I
Hmm.
was coming from a different place, and like you know, in business, like I always kind of think about like did I do the right thing? Was I like too tough or too light? And it's usually there's two ways to look at that. Like I kind of try evaluate my day, right, or my reaction to something. And one way to look at that would be external, right? Like so, what did that appear like? How was I appearing to, right? But the other one is internal. Like where was I coming from? What
Hmm.
place was I coming from? And so to me, that's also like if I'm sure I might have been tough, I might have like pushed people, challenged people too much. Uh, that's not as important as where I was coming from. Like if I was coming from a place of like a care, or was I coming from a place I want to dominate, right? So like they're different, totally different places to come from, and so being having access to even that inquiry is awesome for me.
Very powerful. Yeah. Embodied leadership. How
Yeah,
it's like power versus force, like true authentic power.
yeah.
How are you noticing that these days? Where are you showing up in your upper body versus how do you make that shift into being more embodied and grounded
I
and
mean,
where you're
step one
coming
is being
from?
aware. Being aware when I'm wrapped up in stuff, um, and then trying to have breaks, like reset. So
Hmm.
being able to reset, and it's a practice. It's not like I'm far from perfect. But I noticed like, okay, well, I'm totally wrapped up. Like this is like driving me crazy, pissing me off. Like there's something there, right? And it's like, where's this coming from? Like, and what do I believe in, and so on. So it's easy. It's one of those things. Again, it's easy in theory, hard in practice, right? So it's kind of like um, when I trained Aikido, I remember we would talk about randori, right? Like so, it's
The
like when you're
multiple attackers, right?
multiple
Randori.
attackers. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
standing in the middle and imagine like a kung fu movie, right? Like and you're there and like you're just getting pounded from all sorts of angles, right? And then you see the masters, they're like standing there very calm with very little energy, just like redirecting it and like making it look like effortless. Like that's kind
Hmm.
of like the visual that I aspire to get to, right? And so why does that matter? So like, Monday morning you come to office and there's this email, that bill, this conflict, that like those are attacks.
Hmm.
right? Like we experience this. We are that martial artist with multiple attackers every day,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like stuff is flying out like at us all the time. And so I can be pissed off and like try to fight one at the other, take blows, or I can try to find the center, ground myself, and try to exude, use as little energy to redirect and do that gracefully. So that's what I aspire to do. And yeah, I don't know. I'm still like, I don't know, white belt, blue belt, somewhere there on the journey. So there's still ways to go.
But what a humble thing to acknowledge. And it brings me right back to the top of our call where you said the two things that connected us were the integral approach, like
Mhm.
the whole systems change, all the toolkits, getting to the next level, and then the dojo.
Yeah,
So how does this tie back to like, wow, it's a practice. You're a white belt, blue belt,
yeah.
you're on the journey. What would you say about the approach that you and I are taking? Like we have regular team practice. It's part of going to work. We have a dojo. We practice.
Yeah.
So why is that so important? Why is it so integral? Say that word to what we're doing.
So one of my, before I met you, when I was seeking a coach, what I realized is that it, there are books. You can go and buy a book, and any of this sort of theories. There's a fabulous material on that. That doesn't make it. You don't embody a book, right? You read a book, or you take a course, whatever. You have a high. You may have an insight, and it just kind of tapers off and goes away. It doesn't become a part of you. Um, so um, so what does become a part of you is become once it becomes a practice. Right? Like I said, all this stuff is simple in theory and very hard in embodiment, like becoming a second nature, owning it, having it, being it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what the importance I think of a dojo, right? So that's why I was like, you and I used to kind of ponder on about that. Like if you take an elite athlete, for example, um, they're practicing 99% of the
Yeah.
time for that game or that match or whatever. Yet with most of us, CEOs or business people or whatever, we are just in the match. We don't practice. So how do you become better, right? How do you, and where's that transformational opportunity, right? Like it doesn't happen on its own. And so in tech world we talk about petering out, uh, and
Mm-hmm.
so basically, as a manager, you get promoted, get promoted until a point where you fail, and that's when you peter out. Like essentially there's like this magical glass ceiling through which you don't have access to breakthrough
Mm-hmm.
unless you have access, right? So that access is not going to be a book. It needs to be a guide, sort of like the hero's journey, right? Like somebody needs
Mm-hmm.
to invite you on that journey. And so that's where the quality of the dojo or the regular practice, or um, yeah, that's where that becomes interesting.
Yeah. Well said. What do you think your employees would say about the experience they're having with Plus Plus culture and how it's different, how different it really is, and why?
They would say it's intentional. They would say, I mean, everyone says, "Oh, we have great culture," right? Like a lot of companies say that, and usually and then usually what follows is like we have free food and you can bring dogs to work, right?
Right. Bonuses and benefits and perks. It's all extrinsic motivators, right?
Exactly. And so if you kind of think about A players want to do their best work. They're the ones who seek the most feedback.
They want feedback. Yeah.
They want feedback. They want to be surrounded with amazing people. They want to do their best work. And so I would say uh, uh, people on our team would say that our culture is deliberate, so it's intentional, like it's actually designed. Like you're going to have a culture one way or another, either by chance, by choice. So
Right.
by choice, like we're actually shaped it. We hire people coming in based on core values. We actually interview for humble, hungry, and smart, and so we have a way to interview for that. And then, so because culture values are hard to shape, value set is sort of fixed in stone, more or less. Mindset is moldable, and then skill set is easy to equip somebody with. So we actually don't care so much about skill set. We care about value set and mindset, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly the frame I use. Yeah.
Yeah. So interview for value set, coach for mindset, and train for skill set. So that's sort of how I view it. So
I think this is also a great in for the notion of the difference between, like, if we want workplaces to feel engaged or fulfilling, how do you do that? And you can try to do the outside in thing, the extrinsic motivators, like you just said, the free coffee and bring your dog to work and babysitting. It's all great. But what is someone intrinsically motivated to do? And for the people who want the feedback and want to go through the conflict, I experience that there's a quality of aliveness like we have on the mat when we're wrestling. There's a quality of trust that develops on the other side of conflict. And it makes those types of workplaces where people are continuously engaging and coaching and feedback as a practice very different from companies that even say we have a great culture or even a conscious culture. It's like the notion that you and I both are aligned around of the deliberately developmental organization as being like a different beast altogether in some sense. What would you say about the DDO approach and how it fits into what we're up to or you're up to?
I mean, so yeah, so I mean that definitely resonated with me a lot. Like so, I remember reading two books. One was the Malcolm Gladwell's, the whole 10,000 hours, right? Like you need to, if you want to be a master at anything, you need 10,000 hours of practice. And then I think I read, was it Peak Performance or another book that kind of debunked that whole idea, because it's not sufficient to just train for 10,000 hours. Like that, it needs to be a deliberate practice. So for example, if I drive a car for 10,000 hours, which most of us have done, doesn't necessarily mean we became better drivers. As a matter of fact, we might have gotten worse. Right?
And we don't even know the first thing about driving professionally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think my driving has improved or changed over the last decade or two, right? Because there
Yeah.
was no deliberate practice.
No
There was
feedback,
just
no
no
training.
feedback.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's 10,000 hours is not of practice is not enough. It needs to be a deliberate practice. And so the key to that is having the feedback loop, like, and that needs to be as rapid as possible. So
Mm-hmm.
even just having that agreement in the workplace of providing one another feedback is super important.
Yeah, it's hard to emphasize, like when I sit with your team, even in our first offsite, let alone like week to week, you guys are completely authentic. Any tension that is arising, they bring it to you. And that's what's so unusual and is so key to our approach is that you, of course, go first as the leader and people speak feedback to the CEO. And you, Marko, sit there and mirror it back and take it in and say thank you even. And there may be that we joke in martial arts too, there is no revenge, but there is my turn. So obviously we trade sides, there's an exchange, but it's done in a way where we're following a form to prevent injury. And on the other side of that, it's hard to describe to people, but it really is magic. It is that feeling that I and you both experience on the mat of like, oh, band of brothers and sisters. You can be that close to the people you work with, just like it were a sports team or something like that. So just to commend you again for it's a rare leader who has the kind of experience and success that you have and that you're willing really to empower people to speak their truth to you and
Yeah.
that they love it. they love working at PlusPlus, and the results speak for themselves. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's not always easy. It's also sometimes a lot of feedback, and it's hard to ego kicks in, and it's like it's hard to be it's challenging sometimes to take it all in and to acknowledge it and all that, but that's the only way to be deliberate about growth.
Yeah, there's that. In closing here, I'll ask you one more question, but I'm reminded of that old notion by Plato that in order to have an ideal society, we either need for the kings to become philosophers or for the philosophers to be kings. And it sounds so much like the conscious leader. Like we need the people who are in charge, who are the leaders in our society, to see the value in being conscious. And so, again, I think it's really admirable, the company that you're creating, given that, there's so many shortcuts, it seems, to quick success, but to really build something that is worth leaving behind, and to honor the people you work with through that. I think it's, again, really commendable. So what would you say to people who are listening to this and are like, I don't really get it, maybe I'm curious? What would you say to other leaders who are considering following in your footsteps?
Well, so for me, it was really about what do I want out of this, and like I wanted my journey, right? Like my experience. This is like I want to grow as an entrepreneur, as a founder. I want to get to my own next level, and this is sort of like this is the path that I created for myself as a way there that I saw works. So it's been great for me. So I mean, yeah, I would definitely encourage people to explore it, to kind of be suspended in that inquiry, like what is that they want, and starting with the why, right? Like again, so yeah, so I would definitely look into that, and I would question, given where we want to get to, who is in our corner, like who are the people in our corner to support us, right? Like what's that structure, because it's going to be very painful and slow or impossible to do it solo. So even an athlete, tennis player, boxer, or whoever, they have people in their corner. So
Multiple people, yeah.
Multiple people in their corner. That's the only way to do it. So who provides that structure for you as a CEO, as a leader, as a whatever executive? Who are people in your corner? That's my question, I guess.
Nice. Who's in your corner? I love that. Yeah. And it's so much more interesting, isn't it, to go on this journey, this hero's journey of awakening as a human being and a leader. Yeah. And we used to say success without fulfillment is fool's gold.
Yeah.
It's really kind of the booby prize, because then you get that and then you go, well, now what? What was the meaning of it? So who's in your corner is a great takeaway.
Yeah.
All right, sir. Thank you so much. And we will do it again soon, I'm sure.
I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.